What's up, Thriving Plant-Based family? In this video, I'm very happy to be talking about tips for new yoga teachers. We have had so many site members that have become so inspired through their yoga practices that they wanted to then share it with the rest of the world, and they have become teachers. And I remember very well when I first became a teacher and how intimidating and scary it can be, and so I wanted to make this video to help you guys out and give you some of my best tips and tricks for becoming that best yoga teacher that you could possibly be. One of the most common questions that I get is, how do you come up with creative and new sequences and transitions, and how do you sort of keep that fresh? My number one answer to that is going to be the development of your own personal practice. Now, this is something that's just going to happen naturally over the course of time. You want to make sure that you're spending time almost every day on your yoga mat just playing around. So this is separate from going to a class and taking a class or following one of my tutorials online or any other online yoga. You want to really create that space to just be able to be there, you and your mat and your breath, and be playing. Now, I know a lot of people really like to listen to music. I love to listen to music when I'm practicing yoga, but for whatever reason, I've had sort of the most profound sort of sequences come to me, or, developments in my practice happen when I didn't have any music playing. It's just me and my breath. So that's just a personal preference, but you definitely want to make sure that you create space for your own personal practice. Now, this is something that when people begin to teach, especially if they're teaching a lot of classes a week, this is something that very often is neglected in a yoga teacher's own practice. Is we spend all of our time giving and all of our time teaching and running from class to class, and you get burnt out on it. You want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and the best way to do that is to create the space for your own practice. So while developing your own personal practice takes time, there are a few things that you can do in the interim to sort of help you create fun sequences. One of the things that I like to do is if I go and take a yoga class and the teacher presents a really fun sequence or a really unique transition or something like that, I like to write it down after the class so that I can sort of have it in my little bag of tricks, and I can incorporate it into a yoga class that I create for students. Now, you can take those sequences and you can make them your own. You can use them exactly as they were. You might say something like, I was in a class the other day and the teacher did this and I thought it was really fun. But just please know that it's totally okay to borrow sequences, to borrow ideas, to borrow transitions from other teachers. Everyone does it. It's not stealing. There's no such thing as a patent on a sequence. So feel free to do that. Don't feel like you're not doing something that all teachers don't do. We all do it, and it's perfectly okay. And I encourage you guys to take sequences from any of the flows on Thriving Plant-Based and incorporate them into your classes. And you'll find that over time, as you're teaching and as you're practicing them yourself, you'll probably put your own little creative twist on it and make it your own. And I definitely encourage that. A little side note about your personal practice is I like to keep a pen and paper nearby. If I come across a sequence that I really like or a flow I really like, I write it down, and oftentimes I'll think, oh, well, I'll remember that, and I don't. And I don't know if that's just me and my mind doesn't work that way, but I always think I'm gonna remember it and I don't. So I do like to write it down, or you can always take out your little iPhone and record your practice, and that way you have it sort of on file. Another really common question that I get a lot is, should you write down your class plan? And I think that that is your own personal choice. I don't think writing it down or not writing it down I don't think one way is better than the other. I think everybody's brain sort of functions differently, and I've been to amazing classes where the teacher is just winging it, and I've been to amazing classes where the teacher looks down at her pad of paper and makes sure that we didn't miss anything. So that's really your personal choice. I know that for me, in my own experience, when I was a new teacher, I really felt more comfortable sort of writing down my lesson plan and writing down the sequences so that I didn't forget things. Now, I always had this sort of concern that I would draw a blank and I would completely blank out in the class, and I'd be just standing up there like, you have like the nightmare where you're naked or something. Anyway, so I would always have this fear, and I felt that, although that never happened, I felt that writing down my class plan alleviated that sort of fear. So it might be helpful just in that regard to make you go into your class feeling more relaxed. What I found with writing down my sequences is that it helped me feel comfortable in the beginning as a teacher, but then I definitely moved away from that practice rather quickly. And instead of writing down an exact lesson plan, I would just sort of go into the class kind of knowing what like peak pose was going to be, you know, and knowing a few poses that I wanted to work up to that, or sort of having an idea of what the focus of the class was going to be, whether it was going to be back bending or hip opening or grounding or something like that. And I would just have like a mental list of certain asana that I wanted to include into that, and then you can sort of adjust and modify as you move through your class. And it just comes with experience that you'll become more and more comfortable moving away from that written lesson plan. But don't feel like if you're someone that wants that organized lesson plan, that's not wrong. If that's you, go with it, 100%. Now that said, you've probably heard the saying that if you go into your class with a class plan, you should be ready to completely throw that plan out and change everything depending on what's going on with your students. I've been to classes and I've definitely had the experience of going to a class where, you know, maybe you're set on a schedule to teach an intermediate level class and you show up and everybody in the class is at a beginner level and they're struggling with some basic postures, yet you have this like advanced vinyasa flow planned. I've had the experience of being in a class like that where the vast majority of the students weren't ready, yet the teacher powered through with her plan because she wanted to teach what she planned to teach, and it didn't really work. So one of the questions I always like to ask myself is, how can I serve my students? Or am I serving my students? How can I best serve? Because that's really what you're doing as a yoga teacher. You're not there to show off what you know. You're not there to perform. You're not there to do anything other than serve the students that come to your class. So if you look around and you have this flow planned, you're in the middle of this flow, and you look around and you see 80% of your students are doing chaturanga completely incorrectly, don't hesitate to sort of break away from the flow of your class and take a few minutes to just break down chaturanga and demonstrate it to people and show them how they can modify it and make it more useful for them. Feel free to stop and break it down and have it be more of a workshop vibe for a few minutes, and then you can go right back into your flow. Another really great way to become a good teacher is just the practice of teaching, right? So just begin to teach classes. A lot of times when we're a new teacher, I know that I felt very intimidated going into a yoga studio where all the other teachers were very seasoned, and here I was fresh out of my first teacher training. And although I felt somewhat confident, it was intimidating to come into that situation. So you wanna just be able to get practice in teaching. You wanna be able to get that practice of having that language of yoga flow out of your mouth. So one of the ways to get practice if you don't have anyone to practice on is to sort of talk yourself through your own yoga practice. You can do your sequence, you can write it down, or you can just go off the top of your head, but as you're practicing, talk yourself through your own yoga practice, because sometimes it can take a little bit of a while to have things sort of flow off your tongue really swimmingly as we're teaching the postures and giving physical cues and reminding people of the breath, and also using that particular tone of voice when we're teaching. I know that I like to use a soothing tone of voice, and I really appreciate it when yoga teachers use that voice and they're not sort of shouting asana commands at me. Just my personal preference. Another thing you can do to get more experience teaching is you can volunteer. You can teach for free. One of the places that I used to teach was at my kids' school. I helped to start a wellness program at the school they were in California, and I taught free yoga like every Thursday morning to anyone who wanted to come. So that was like parents or any teachers that could make it, anything like that. So all of those situations, you want to teach a yoga class at your church, you want to teach yoga class to your kids' kindergarten class, whatever it is that gives you that experience of getting up in front of people and leading them through a practice is going to make you feel more and more comfortable and confident when you go into your yoga studio classes. Another common concern with a lot of new teachers is that fear of sort of blanking out in the middle of class and being like, oh shit, what am I doing? I totally forgot. I was halfway through the sequence and I have no idea what I'm doing. And in all likelihood, that's probably not going to happen to you. I remember having that fear, and I don't know if it ever came to fruition, but if that does happen to you, it's not a problem. First of all, you're in a yoga class, so you're not really in a room full of people that are going to condemn you and judge you very swiftly and harshly. Aside from that, you can just put your class into downward facing dog, have them take a few moments to reconnect with their breath, maybe have them rest in child's pose, maybe have them move through a vinyasa on their own time, following their own breath. There's just a few things like these little tricks that you can just place them in so you can have a few moments to sort of collect yourself, to collect your thoughts, and maybe reference your notes that you've brought to class. But even the most seasoned yoga teacher, when you're in the midst of a class, if you're teaching like a long and involved sequence, maybe you do the right side and then you're on to the left side, and halfway through you skip something or something and one of the students reminds you and you're like, oh shit. You just make a joke of it and you laugh at yourself, and it actually helps to make your students feel more comfortable and connected to you and part of sort of like a group effort. I've been in tons of classes where extremely experienced yoga teachers have had this happen, and it's not an issue. I don't think any less of them. No one's gonna think any less of you, I promise. One other tip that I have that nobody asked me about, but I'm just gonna throw it in there because I find it to be a useful tip, is to bring a hand towel with you to class. If the studio doesn't provide little towels, just go ahead and bring one of your own, and I find it really helpful, especially in hot yoga classes or yoga classes where they practice at a warm temperature, which most yoga classes do now. They're not having the air conditioning blasting, so some people can get really, really sweaty, and you're gonna slip and slide all over them if you don't have a towel to put down on them. And I really do like to make it a point, no matter how big your class is, to try to give one hands-on adjustment to every person in that class. Even if it's just giving them a light adjustment while they're in child's pose, or an easy one in downward facing dog or something. You wanna go and connect like physically with every single person in that class. Maybe you don't get to them till Shavasana, that's totally fine, but it just lets them know that you're there with them, you've seen them, you recognize that they've come to class, and you've made a connection. And as a student, that means a lot to them. You really want to try to get at least one hands-on adjustment done. So that said, a lot of times these people are extremely sweaty, and it might be uncomfortable for you. They may feel self-conscious about sweating on you. When you give them adjustment, you might slide right off of them. So for super sweaty guys, sometimes I'll go over to them in child's pose and I'll just lay that hand towel on their back and push down on their lower part of their back, just to give them a nice adjustment that way. So it kind of takes that element of like extreme sweatiness out of it. So just a little useful tip. No one told me that. I had to learn that on my own. So for my last tip that I'm going to give you guys today, and I think this is really the most important one, is before you open up your mouth in that yoga class, before you begin to speak, take a moment to really tune into yourself and connect with that reason, that reason why it is that you're passionate about this practice, why it is that you want to share, what it is that you want to convey about this practice that has just been so profoundly helpful to you. Connect with that before you open up your mouth and even speak one word in the class. Connect with that reason, and that's really going to help you come from this authentic place of love, because we're really there to share love and give love to your students. People come to yoga classes for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes people come because they want to have a cute yoga butt. Sometimes they come because they want to lose weight. Sometimes they come because they want to connect with spirituality. Sometimes they come because they're in physical pain. Sometimes they come because they're lonely or depressed. But whatever it is, you can be pretty sure that they have come to that yoga class because they want to be loved, just like everyone else. So when you connect to that place, you're able to come from that place of love within yourself, and that is going to translate into your teaching. It's gonna occur naturally, and that is the most important part of being a teacher, is to be authentic and come from a place of love, and that will just transmit to your students, and that's what's gonna keep them coming back to your class, is if they feel that. It's not so much about how good you are at instructing in asana. It's not so much about are they burning calories in your class or whatever it is. Like, my favorite yoga teachers have always been about sort of an intangible vibration that they transmit in that classroom. And so just remember that that's why you're really there. You're not there to teach them how to do a handstand. Maybe you are, but that's not really what it's about. So remember to connect with that reason, to connect with that thing that ignited this passion in you, and you're gonna be okay. And if you guys ever have any other questions about yoga teaching or anything else, just go ahead and leave them in the forum and I'll make a video for you. I'll see you soon, yogis. Mwah.